The fifth time Brandon asked about my lake house, I stopped answering him, not rudely. I smiled, the way I've learned to smile at things that don't sit right with me, and I said, "Oh, it's just an old place. Nothing special." And I changed the subject. He laughed and moved on. But that night, sitting alone on my back porch with a cup of coffee going cold in my hand, I kept turning it over. 5 times. 5 separate conversations, over 4 months, always circling back to the same property. The square footage. Whether I'd ever considered renting it out. Whether the deed was in my name alone or split with anyone else. My daughter Lily had been with Brandon for 14 months. She brought him to Thanksgiving, and I watched him at the table, the way he worked the room, the easy laugh, the way he complimented everything. The green bean casserole, the centerpiece Lily had put together from stuff she bought at the dollar store. He said it looked like something from a magazine. Lily beamed. I watched her beam, and I felt something I couldn't name yet. My wife Carol passed 4 years ago. Ovarian cancer. 13 months from diagnosis to the end. Lily was there for every appointment, every round of treatment, sleeping on a cot in the hospital room the last 3 weeks. When Carol died, she left Lily a modest life insurance policy and a trust account we'd set up years before, enough to be meaningful, not enough to make anyone rich. Or so I thought. Apparently, to someone looking from the outside, it was enough. I'm 63 years old. I spent 31 years as a licensed electrician, the last 12 running my own small contracting business, before I sold it and retired. I'm not a suspicious man by nature. I raised Lily to believe the best in people, the way Carol always did. But I've also pulled enough bad wiring out of old walls to know that what looks neat on the surface can be a disaster underneath. I didn't say anything to Lily about the lake house questions. Not at first. I told myself I was being paranoid. Brandon had a good job, or said he did a financial planning firm downtown, his own client list. A condo he rented in a nice part of the city. He dressed well. He spoke well. Every time he was around me, he was warm and attentive, always asking about my health, my retirement, whether I needed anything done around the house. That last part, whether I needed anything done around the house. I started hearing it differently. It was my old friend Dennis who first said the word out loud. Dennis and I have been friends since we were in our 20s, roofing houses together, summers before either of us had our licenses. He'd seen something on the news. He told me a segment about a type of con that had been running through the region. Men, usually charming, usually presenting themselves as financial professionals, who targeted widows and widowers, who then extended their reach to the adult children of those widows and widowers, who built relationships over months, gathered information about assets, property, accounts, and then, once they were embedded deeply enough through marriage or joint finances, or both, moved quickly. I thanked Dennis and hung up the phone and sat in my kitchen for a long time. I want to be honest about what happened inside me in that moment, because I think it matters. My first feeling wasn't anger. It was shame. Shame that I had introduced this man to my daughter, that I had sat across from him at my Thanksgiving table and said grace, and passed him the rolls, that I had clapped him on the shoulder after dinner and said, "Good to have you here, son." I actually called him son, and meant it. And underneath the shame was something worse. Fear. Not for myself, for Lily. Because Lily had her mother's heart open, generous, the kind of woman who gave people the benefit of the doubt long past the point where the doubt was worth giving. She'd been lonely after Carol died. We both had been, and Brandon had shown up in that loneliness like a light left on in a window. I needed to know if I was right before I said a single word to her. If I was wrong, I would never forgive myself for planting that seed. And if I was right, I needed something she could see with her own eyes, because Lily had already told me twice, gently but clearly, that she felt I hadn't fully warmed up to Brandon. She wasn't angry about it. She understood. She said, "Dad, I know you're still protective of me since Mom, but I'm okay. I'm really okay." And I had nodded and smiled and let it go. I hired a private investigator named Ruth Calloway. A friend of Dennis's, former police, ran a small firm out of an office above a dry cleaner 2 towns over. I met her on a Tuesday morning and told her everything I knew. which wasn't much Brandon's full name, the name of the financial firm he'd mentioned, the neighborhood where his condo was. She listened without writing anything down. Then she asked me 3 questions I hadn't expected, and I knew she was good. 3 weeks later, she called me back. Brandon's real name was Brandon. At least that much was accurate. But the financial firm he'd named was real, only in the loosest sense. A registered LLC, with no brick-and-mortar office, no staff besides himself, and a client list Ruth described as mostly elderly, mostly isolated, mostly in the process of being quietly drained. She had found 2 women who had filed complaints, one through a state financial oversight board, one through a civil attorney, both describing the same pattern. Meet them through a mutual contact or a social event. Build trust slowly. Become indispensable. Identify assets. Propose joint financial planning. Move money. Disappear, or in one case, wait for a marriage that never quite happened. Neither complaint had gone anywhere. One woman had dropped hers after Brandon's attorney sent a letter. The other had moved away. Ruth also found that Brandon had been asking questions about Lily's trust. Not directly to the bank. He wasn't that careless. But he had mentioned it to at least 2 people in ways that Ruth characterized as information gathering. One of those people was a notary who sometimes did work for his LLC. I sat with that information for 6 days. 6 days of Sunday dinners with Lily where Brandon sat across from me, cutting his chicken and talking about interest rates, and I passed the bread basket and asked about his week and watched my daughter look at him like he was the best thing she'd ever found. On the 7th day, Lily called me. She didn't call me to talk about Brandon. She called because she wanted to tell me she'd found a ring in Brandon's jacket pocket. She was laughing when she said it, this bright, nervous, disbelieving laugh. I hadn't heard from her since she was 17 and couldn't believe she'd made the honor roll. "Dad," she said, "I think he's going to propose. I think it's actually happening." She paused. "I just wanted to tell you because Mom's not here to tell, and you're the next best thing." I held the phone against my ear and looked out the window at the backyard where Carol's garden had gone mostly to seed since she passed, and I said, "Lily, baby, I need you to come over tomorrow. Just you. Can you do that?" A small silence. "Is everything okay?" "Everything's fine," I said. "I just want to see my daughter." She came the next afternoon. I made us coffee, and we sat at the kitchen table, the same table where she'd done her homework for 12 years, and I put Ruth's folder between us. I didn't say anything dramatic. I just opened it, and I let her read. It took about 8 minutes. I watched her face move through every stage I had already moved through confusion. Then the careful rereading of something you hope you misunderstood. Then the stillness that comes just before the breaking. She didn't cry right away. She closed the folder very carefully, the way you close something you wish you'd never opened, and she put both hands flat on the table. "How long have you known?" she asked. 3 weeks, I said. "I'm sorry I didn't tell you sooner. I needed to be sure." She nodded. She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "He proposed last night, Dad." I said yes. I reached across the table and covered her hands with mine, and I didn't say a single word, because there was nothing to say that wasn't already sitting there between us in that folder. What happened over the next 2 weeks I will let Lily tell in her own time, in her own way, because it belongs to her. What I can tell you is that she didn't fall apart. She's Carol's daughter, and Carol never fell apart. Not once, not even at the end. Lily asked me for a copy of everything Ruth had compiled. She made her own calls. She talked to one of the women who had filed the earlier complaint, found her through a community legal aid organization, and the 2 of them spoke for almost 2 hours. And then Lily told me she had a plan, and she asked me to trust her. I want to tell you I immediately said yes. The truth is, I hesitated, because my instinct, the same instinct that had made me hire Ruth in the first place, was to be the one to handle it, to walk into a room and put the folder on the table and let the chips fall, to protect her, the way I'd always protected her, the way you spend 30 years believing your job as a father is to stand between your child and anything that might hurt them. But Lily was 30 years old. She had sat in a hospital room and held her mother's hand and said goodbye, and she had come out the other side of that with a kind of quiet strength I had watched develop. The way you watch a tree grow so gradually, you almost miss it until the day you look up and realize it can weather a storm without you. Holding it up. Trust me, Dad, she said. And I did. Brandon had planned a small engagement celebration, just a dinner, he said. Immediate family and a few close friends, at a restaurant downtown. He'd made the reservation himself. Lily's closest friend Dana would be there, and Brandon's 2 work colleagues, and me. What Brandon did not know was that Ruth had spent the previous 10 days working with Lily and a contact at the state attorney's office. What Brandon did not know was that the notary, the one he'd used to gather information about Lily's trust, had agreed to provide a written statement. What Brandon did not know was that one of his former colleagues, a man who had worked briefly with his LLC before realizing what was happening, had been located in another state and had sent a detailed email to the attorney's office the previous Friday. And what Brandon did not know, as he stood up at that dinner table to give a toast, was that Lily was recording him on her phone. He spoke for about 4 minutes. He talked about finding her, about how she'd changed his life, about building a future together. He talked about family, and here he looked at me, specifically, warmly, about how grateful he was that her father had welcomed him. He talked about the lake house. Actually, he said he hoped someday, when I was ready, I might consider making it a family gathering place for all of us. He smiled when he said it. A beautiful, practiced smile. Lily was watching him the whole time. She'd pulled her phone from her purse when he started, and she held it casually on the table in front of her, angled toward him. I had my hands in my lap and I was perfectly still. I have been an electrician for 31 years. I know how to wait for the right moment to cut the power. When he finished his toast, there was a small, warm applause. I raised my glass with everyone else. I looked at my daughter across the table, and she looked back at me. And whatever she needed to see in my face, she found it, because she took a slow breath and set her phone face down on the table. I want to say something too, she said. Her voice was steady, not angry, not shaking. The voice of a woman who has decided exactly what she is going to do and is at peace with it. She didn't yell. She didn't throw anything. She laid it out the way her mother used to lay out the truth when one of us needed to hear it clearly, quietly, without cruelty, but without softness either. She said his real business history. She said the names of the women who had come before her. She said the word trust, the legal kind. Her mother's, the one she had confirmed Brandon had been probing. She said all of it in the tone of someone reading a grocery list. Brandon's smile went through 4 or 5 changes in about 15 seconds. I watched all of them. When she finished, the table was absolutely silent. Dana was staring at her plate. Brandon's 2 colleagues were looking at each other. Brandon himself was very still. He started to speak something measured, something that began with Lily. "Sweetheart, I think there's been a misunderstanding." "There's been no misunderstanding," Lily said. "And I'd like you to leave. There are people outside who'd like to speak with you." Ruth had made a call. I had agreed to it when Lily asked me. 2 investigators from the state attorney's office were waiting in the lobby. Brandon left. He didn't make a scene. I've learned that men like that rarely do, when they realize the door has already closed. After he was gone, the table sat in silence for a moment. Then, Dana reached across and took Lily's hand. Lily looked at her, and then she looked at me. And for the first time all evening, her face did something it hadn't done yet. It cracked, just slightly, at the edges. Not collapsed, just cracked. The way good things crack when the pressure finally lets up. I got up and went around the table, and I put my hand on her shoulder, and she leaned into me, and I stood there and let her lean. We stayed at the restaurant for another hour after that. We ordered food. Dana told a story about a terrible date she'd had in her 20s and made Lily laugh, which was exactly the right thing to do. I ordered dessert, which I never do. The table had gone from an ambush to something almost ordinary, the way Lily had intended. On the drive home, I called Dennis and told him what had happened. He said, "You did the right thing." And I said, "She did the right thing." And there was a distinction there I wanted him to understand. I have thought, in the weeks since, about what I would say if someone asked me whether I was angry. And the answer is yes. Not loudly, but yes. I am angry that a man sat at my table and looked me in the eye and smiled while he was calculating what my property was worth. I am angry that he used Lily's grief, her real, bone-deep grief over losing her mother as an opening. That he knew how to look for loneliness and step into it like it was a door left unlocked. But here is the thing about anger, at 63, that I have learned. Anger is information. It tells you something is wrong, and then you decide what to do with it. You can let it drive, or you can put it in the back seat and drive yourself. My daughter needed me to drive myself, so I did. Carol used to say that the most dangerous thing in the world was a person who had learned to look trustworthy without being trustworthy. She meant it as a lesson about character build the real thing, she would say, because the imitation costs more in the end. I thought about that a lot during those 3 weeks of waiting. I thought about what kind of man Carol would have wanted me to be in that situation. Not reckless, not passive either, just clear. The lake house is still mine. It sits at the end of a gravel road about 40 minutes north of town, and in the summer, the water in the morning is so still you can see the trees reflected in it like a second forest. Carol and I bought it the year Lily was born. We used to take her there every August, and she would run into the lake before we even had the car fully unpacked, and Carol would stand on the dock laughing at her and at me. Lily called me last Sunday and asked if we could open it up for the 4th of July weekend. She said Dana might come, and a few of their friends, and that she just wanted something simple, something that felt like family. I said yes before she finished the sentence. We are not a dramatic family. We don't have speeches ready for occasions that require them. What we have is this: a kitchen table and coffee, and the habit of showing up for each other. We have a lake house with a dock that needs 2 planks replaced this spring, and I have already bought the lumber. I have been asked, since this happened, whether I am glad I waited, whether it wouldn't have been simpler to confront Brandon earlier, the moment I had the folder, to save everyone the trouble of the dinner and the planning and all the days in between. And I understand why someone would ask that. I asked myself the same thing, but Lily needed to be the one to end it. Not because I couldn't have done it, because she could. And there is a difference between a thing being done for you and a thing being done by you that matters more than efficiency, more than speed, more than my need. At 63, to still be the person who fixes things. She had already survived the hardest thing our family has ever been through. She didn't need me to carry this one. She needed me to stand in the room while she carried it herself. I am not a perfect father. I was away more than I should have been when she was young. Long jobs, early mornings, the kind of calendar that gets away from you before you've noticed. There are things I would do differently, but I was there in that restaurant, and when she leaned into me afterward, I was solid enough to hold. Carol would have liked that. She would have said so in the plainest possible words, the way she always did, and then she would have told me to stop being sentimental and help clear the table. I am working on it. This spring, I will replace those 2 planks on the dock. And when July comes and Lily drives up that gravel road and gets out of her car before I can even make it to the porch, I will be standing there, and the lake will be behind me, and it will belong to exactly the people it was always meant to belong to. That's enough for me. At 63, that is more than enough.